Today, I'm going to talk to Michael Lake. He's become a pretty good friend of mine. He's a great jazz musician who happens to play the alto trombone, but he's got a lot of really interesting ideas about how to teach people to be better improvisers and better musicians through listening. So let's get started. So, Michael Lake, welcome. Um, you've had a very interesting career, is how I picture this, and I'd like you to give me a little more background about your professional journey and your musical journey, if you might.
Sure. Well, and maybe, maybe hearing it gives musicians an idea that, especially in this day and age, having multiple skills is an advantage. I think there was a time maybe where if all you did was play trombone, all you did was play jazz trombone, you might have been able to make, more of a living, and especially if you recorded. But I mean, my journey started out as, I was a music major in school at Arizona State. I went to Minnesota. They called this funky company called me that was made by musicians for musicians, and they were going to take over the music business, and they were going to do it with musicians and not non-musicians who were taking advantage. And so I went there, and it was very interesting. And I played with bands, and we had gigs, and they saw that I had a talent for talking, and so they said, "You're a sales guy. We're going to make you sales." And their their money making enterprise was called Professional Musicians Referral. And this was a time where if you were a musician looking for a band, you would call us up and we'd open up the books and we'd tell you about bands looking for a guitar player. Or if you were a guitar player, we'd tell you about bands. And so I was on the phone convincing musicians to give us $72 and they could have this membership for a year. And I was there for 3 years, and they shipped me off to New Jersey to run that office. And I did that for a while. And then, I kind of needed something new. And so I moved to Boston and played professionally. I had a salsa band. We had a little claim to fame as we got nominated for a Grammy. I moved to New York and I played salsa and jazz with some great people. But at a certain point, I just got tired of being poor. And so I took a gig on a cruise ship as I kind of figured out what I was going to do with my life. I was there for a year. I had a great time. My girlfriend was the head of the beauty salon, so my complexion with facials never looked better, and I was getting massages all the time. It was a great life. I knew if I stayed there for more than a year, though, I'd get pickled, so I left. And that brought me to New York and back to being a professional musician. But at a certain point, I just realized that playing with these great people, I was not going anywhere in a career. And hearing "I'll let you know Thursday if we have anything," that just didn't work for me. So I opened up what we had at the time, which called newspapers, and we had want ads where people advertised for a job. And I found a place a few blocks from me that was a very interesting financial service. They were looking for a sales guy to just cold call, and I had been doing that to supplement my income. So I went there, and that was kind of the next 30 years of my life dedicated toward running a sales division, running a marketing division, building companies to be very large from nothing. And I learned a lot about business and about communication. And I had my own marketing firm for a while, and then I helped a friend build a new company in that industry. And then about 5 years ago, I decided that I needed to move on. I was bored, and it was time, if not now, when, to see what I could do as a musician again. But this time I was going to see what I could use technology-wise to be a musician and to help other musicians. And the marketing guy that I was using in the firm at the time, I sat him down. I said, "Hey, I'm going to leave. I'm going to start a music thing online. I'm not really sure what I can do, but I'd like to bring you on for ideas." And he said, "Let's do a virtual summit." So we put together a virtual summit, and it started with me interviewing, like you are, various musicians. And I was cold calling these musicians or cold writing them, not knowing them, and I got interviews from them, and then they referred me to people. So I did about 65 interviews. We did a week-long live event, and I got an audience of about 10,000 people, 10,000 musicians. And that's how I built my music list. And from there, over the past 5 years, I have put together MusicSavvy.com to help musicians, be better improvisers. I've written books with some of the famous people that I interviewed, Dave Liedman, Richie Byrek. And, I've built a very interesting business and learning adventure online from all of that. So that's kind of my evolution from, getting out of college to being at the age I am and putting stuff together that's helping musicians.
So, Mike, you filled in a whole bunch of blanks, but you haven't talked yet at all. You said you were a musician. You may have said that you play trombone, but I know you as an alto trombonist who plays jazz. When I tell somebody he's a jazz alto trombonist, and most folks have never put those three words together. So, tell me about that. How did you get to the alto trombone?
Well, when I was in college, I had my teacher. I was a jazz player in college, and so that I wasn't, I wasn't allowed to study with the trombone professor because he was working with the legit trombone players. So I had the student, what we call it, the teacher's assistant or whatever it was. He was my teacher, and he was very good. And he one day he had a double trombone case. He opened it up, and there was a tenor on one side and an alto on the other. And I thought that was cute. And he put it together, and I thought that was kind of interesting. And I saw in it kind of a jazz Ferrari, shorter slide, thinner tubing. I felt it would speak quicker, speak faster, and I was right. And so I bought one, I started to play it, but I realized that I wasn't able to keep it up and keep the tenor up because they were very different, for me at least. And I knew that, like any great explorer, I had to burn the ship at the shore. So I sold my tenor. And I had gigs at the time. I had a great gig in town with a house band, a big band, and we were bringing in, famous people to play with. So I had to figure out alto pretty quickly. But I realized that if I had no fallback, I was going to have to do it. And so that's all I've played. I haven't owned a tenor since. And I've only owned a Yamaha, and I wore one out, and then I got another 671, I think it was, and I wore that out. And then about 5 years ago, I got my Adams Sterling Silver alto, and I just love it. I love the sound of it. And now I play a 6.5 AL mouthpiece, which is a big mouthpiece. That's not a typical alto mouthpiece, but when I play a gig, I can't sound like a weird version of the trombone. I have to sound like a trombone. And when I walk in, people will make the joke about the toy trombone and what happened, did you wash it? And I've heard all the jokes. But once I play, it's kind of like, oh, it's just the trombone. It just looks weird. Right. And I think the mouthpiece does help that, because it's important for me to have a big sound on that horn. And I know that if I play kind of like a stock alto mouthpiece, it's too thin for me. It doesn't work.
Right. Exactly. Well, but now what it sounds like is that you do what a lot of musicians do, and you are kind of doing a juggling act between various things. So tell me more about Music Savvy and what you're doing with it.
Well, being a marketing guy forever makes me realize that you have to pick a niche, right? And so what is my niche? Well, it's teaching jazz in a way that's different from most other ways of teaching jazz. Because if you look online, there's some wonderful guys out there, and they've built some great stuff. But their thing is, these are how chords work. These are the scales that you play over these chords. String them together, play lots of notes, and be a jazz player. And that never really worked for me. And I hear from people all the time that it doesn't work for them. So what I teach instead is being able to hear better, being able to hear the music around you, hear the music that's in your imagination, and being able to connect your instrument, whatever instrument that is, to what you're hearing inside. And that's easier said than done. But what I've dedicated myself to over the last 5 years, and I'm still doing it now, I've got a brand new platform that is teaching standards in a jazz-centric way, ear-centric way, is to help musicians hear the changes and hear what they want to play over it and let their ear guide them rather than the math or rather than the memorized patterns or rather than, okay, I've got to play G Mixolydian over this chord and I've got to play D Dorian over this chord, because I just don't think that's what jazz is. It certainly wasn't the way it was in the beginning. And we've developed jazz education in colleges, and we've developed a theory department. I was a theory and jazz performance major myself, a theory comp major. So I understand that, but I do realize that the moments that I stand up and I think about what to play, I'm not at my best. I'm only at my best when I'm playing something I can hear and I can follow the changes and I'm just emoting. That's when I'm at my best, and that's what I try and teach other jazz players.
So you're saying that you teach people, but I'm guessing that doesn't mean you have a shingle on the door of your house and say, "Come in and have a lesson." You're talking about teaching a different way.
I'm online, musicsavvy.com. Right now, there's a membership where you get 2 of my video courses, you get the collection of interviews, you get a play-along platform that is based on short loops so that you can not think about chords and you can listen to what's going on and emote. My new platform for learning standards, and all of that is centered around an AI that I've built where you can ask it questions and it will direct you toward answers that are within that universe that I described. So if you ask it, how do I develop my ear better for jazz? It may point you to something that Dave Liedman said in our book, Art of Skill. It may direct you to an interview I did with Ritchie or an interview I did with Charles McPherson, where he talks about sing a note, play a note, hear a note. So it's kind of the core that directs you to this universe, as I'm calling it, of products. So it's all online. And I've developed creating audio tracks that enable musicians to stretch their hearing. So for instance, in the standards platform I'm building, you'll play a track and the rhythm section is playing along, and all of a sudden the piano and bass drop out and all you hear is the drums. Can you keep the flow of the changes through that until they come back 4 bars later or 2 bars later? And then it stops in different places. So I'm kind of forcing you to hear the changes in here rather than relying on, listening to the piano player and then playing that scale. So I'm developing tools that help musicians hear themselves and the music better. And again, my favorite phrase is connecting your ear to your instrument.
Yeah. So you are you're riding the top of the wave of this thing that we hear about kind of constantly now, AI, artificial intelligence. When did you was that something that you embraced as soon as you knew about it, or I can't even say that I understand a history of AI, but how did you get close to that and realize that it was a way to teach people?
Well, going way back again, I was always into technology. I mean, I was making music on the Atari Falcon, on the Commodore 64. I have a Mac Classic up there, right? So I was etching circuit boards and ruining the back patio of my parents' home, with acid way back when. I've always been very much into technology, and this goes back to what I was saying about musicians having a variety of skills. So I love technology. I fight with it daily, as you and I talk about from time to time. But nonetheless, I do enjoy figuring out how to use it in order to, in this case, further the skills of musicians. Now, full disclosure, I'll tell you right now that the jazz community is not exactly embracing AI.
Well, yeah. And so I was thinking about that. I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to try to put jazz musicians in some sort of a box, but I would wonder about how jazz musicians respond to that.
Well, I spend a lot of time and energy explaining that this is not a robot that's going to all of a sudden start playing jazz. All it is, in my case, is an index of all of my stuff. Like I've transcribed all of my interviews, every word I've said on my courses. So all it is an index that can answer questions and do it in a way that's conversational with you. And you can have fun with it, by the way. Like I put a post together the other day. Richie Byrek and I were talking a couple of years ago about being on the bandstand with Chet Baker. And Chet Baker had a very embarrassing moment for Richie on purpose to teach him a lesson, old school lesson. And it's a funny story. And so I asked my jazz chat, I said, tell me that story and do it in a poem. And it did. It did a brilliant job. And I've asked it to do things as Shakespeare would have described it. But you can also do things like, I said, tell me ways to improve my ear for jazz playing. And then it'll give me some ideas. And I'll say, give me 500 words on this idea. And then it'll give me that. And I say, give me an exercise I can do to do that. And it'll give me the exercise. So again, it's not a being that's going to take over the jazz world. It's simply using technology to find in a massive information things that are relevant to you, that answer a question or solve a problem that you have. And that's really all it is. And I'll give you one quick anecdote is that I sent out one of my emails that's talking about this, and I asked it a question about how you play jazz in a certain way. And I got a response from one of my subscribers that said, great advice. Too bad it had to come from an AI. So I get it that I'm kind of pushing on a string a little bit, it seems like, from time to time, but I do believe that this is an advancement in helping us find information that helps us.
Well, so I'm thinking about now, it's helping jazz musicians. Well, we may not have to limit it to jazz musicians, but helping them realize what's in their musical mind, to create a musical intention that fits the moment. But that applies to everybody who's a performing musician. So have you, in fact, I think I read something about you that you wrote that, wait a minute, this doesn't just apply to jazz musicians.
No, I think it applies to all musicians. A while back, I was playing in a band with a guy who was a middle school band director. And I asked him if I could borrow the teacher's book and just any instrument book, because I wanted to understand how that publisher, a very famous publisher, was teaching young musicians. And I went through the book, and it was all about what buttons to push, what slide positions, what the notes look like, what triplets are, but there was nothing at all in it that talked about what you hear. And I just think that is missing from a lot of education, whether it's jazz or non-jazz, because all of this centers around your ear. So yeah, I think if a non-jazz musician were to dive into my tools, I would say to them, you're going to benefit by strengthening your ear, because I think your ear helps you in everything from intonation. I think it helps sight reading, because let's face it, we're not just the instrument doesn't automatically go to that dot on the second line. You have to have some connection to nail that note after you read it. I know that if I'm sight reading something super, super fast and I know I'm not hitting all the notes, I'm improvising a little bit. The time is there. The notes aren't quite what's on the page, but no one knows because, that's part of how I can fluff my way through something that I'm not nailing on a sight reading. So I think any musician, regardless of style, it all really comes down to how deeply do you hear the music inside and outside.
Oh,
That's my
yes.
mantra.
I think that door should have been made wide open for every music student a long time ago. And maybe it was. Maybe they did that a long time ago. But yes.
Well, Richie and I wrote a book called Teaching and Learning Jazz, and one of the chapters is on the apprentice way of learning, because before there were jazz programs in schools, if you were a jazz musician, you hung out with your idol, a famous jazz musician, and you would have a beer with them, and they'd talk to you about the music, and you'd play with them, and they'd tell you what you were doing right and wrong. And it was all about listening. There was none of this. There was no book that talked about what scales to play over, what chords. There were no books that talked about 2-5-1, 1-6-2-5, subdominant of the dominant. It was all about hearing. And Richie makes a very interesting point about, different artisans through the ages who have learned their craft by studying at the feet of a master. There's no university program, but I get it. I'm not anti-school because I think they teach a lot of great things. I just want them to teach more about being able to hear more deeply the music.
Yeah. Yeah. So if somebody watching this thinks, "Oh yeah, I think I want to get closer to what you're talking about," what's a really good tip that you can offer them?
Let's say, well, yeah, what I would say is get your instrument out or sit at the piano or whatever your instrument is and play any note within your vocal range and find that note. So sing it. And don't think to yourself, I don't have a good voice. That doesn't matter. All that matters is that you can go, ba, we can find the pitch. So you played the note, you heard, you sang it, play another note, sing it. We're kind of warming up your ear right now. And at a certain point, make the transition to singing a different note, and finding it on your instrument. And it's okay, you fumble around, you find it a little bit, but the key is to do this a little bit every day. And then, and when you sing intervals that are closer to the last ones, so you're not, it's not ba, 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 that's more advanced. So, and do this for like 3 minutes a day. And I think if you're like myself and a lot of the people that I talk to about this, you're going to find that you're becoming closer to your instrument. If you're an improviser, you're going to find the notes quicker that fit the harmonies you're playing over. Because your singing is the closest thing you have to a manifestation of your musical imagination.
Exactly. Yes. Okay. That sounds so right to me. Well, so this is all fascinating. And so tell me and anybody who happens to be watching this, where can people learn about these tools?
Well, if you go to musicsavvy.com, the homepage talks about the membership that basically has everything. And you can go there and you can look at that. But you can also just create an account and play around with some of the tools that are available and look at some of the lessons that just are free, and you can play around with those. So if you go to musicsavvy.com and just click account and just register for a free account, you start to have access to a lot of this stuff. And if you want to piecemeal, you want to buy a certain course and try it out, you can. I've tried to price the membership so that for, $10 a month, you have everything. And you can stop whenever you're done. And in fact, if you try it and you don't like it, I'll give you your money back. I'm really trying to introduce this to as many people as possible, and it may not be for everybody, and that's fine. But you can at least try it out.
Excellent. Excellent. Wonderful. Well, Michael Lake, this is a really illuminating conversation for me. A lot of this I had never heard before, and I think maybe I know you a little better than when we sat down to talk. Thanks very much, Michael.
You're very welcome, Tim. It was a pleasure.
All right. Take care.